So it's a huge privilege for me to be speaking to you today on this concept of farm to fabric, specifically focusing on mohair. Before we start, I just want to say thank you to the entire New York Textile Month team for all the care and the effort they have put into making this event possible and for allowing us these platforms to share our stories. So thank you so much. It's a huge honor to share our story with you today, and I'm very encouraged that these concepts of making and circular economies and the on-the-ground practice of a very tiny studio in the South African desert could or should resonate in some way with you today. Okay. Sorry.
I know what this is. So now you stop share screen,
Okay.
Frances, and just share it again. And then it's okay. Just share it again. I will edit this. And yeah, perfect. Now you can start again.
To give you a brief background, my name is Frances van Hasselt, and I'm an entrepreneur and designer focusing specifically on developing mohair textiles in South Africa. For us, every step of the process is handmade by phenomenal women artisans in remote parts of our country. We focus on sustainable practices, and we really try to preserve and celebrate these traditional craftsmanship in these areas. Before we start, I think it is very important that we know what mohair is. So mohair is the fleece of an Angora goat. It gets a haircut, so it gets shorn every 6 months. And it's very important to note that it's an Angora goat and not to be confused with an Angora rabbit. These two animals really have nothing in common. The one is a goat and the one is a rabbit. They just share this name Angora because they both originate in Turkey in a place called Ankara, which used to be known as Angora. But mohair really is one of the world's most ancient, exclusive, and sustainable natural fibers. In the textile world, it's often referred to as a diamond fiber because the supply of mohair is so scarce. There's very little mohair in the world. And also it has some phenomenal characteristics. I won't go through all of them, but just to mention a few. Mohair has this beautiful natural luster, which gives finished fabrics this beautiful silky and luxe look and feel. It's crease resistant and incredibly lightweight. And yet at the same time, you can have these delicate fabrics, but they are very strong and durable. It's also a fantastic, what we would call ingredient fiber, in that mohair blends beautifully with other animal and plant-based fibers when you're making a yarn. So mohair cashmere, wool, mohair silk. It's a fantastic ingredient fiber when you are putting your threads together. And then widely in the textile world, it's celebrated for its dyeability because it's got this natural luster and sheen and this beautiful character. It really absorbs and showcases color phenomenally. What very few people know, even in South Africa, is that up to 60% of the world's mohair is produced in South Africa, specifically the Karoo, which is the semi-arid region of the country. It's where my family farm with Angora goats, and this is where we have our studio. What is even more interesting is that the supply of mohair is so small that it hasn't been interesting for processing plants to establish outside of those that already exist in South Africa. So it doesn't make sense for a new processing plant to be built because the ones that exist can process all of the supply. So as a result, all the raw mohair from Texas, Australia, New Zealand, all over the world comes to South Africa to be processed. So it becomes this hub for the production and processing of mohair around the world. That said, 80% of the world's supply of mohair leaves South Africa in a very raw form, with very little being done locally to beneficiate this raw material and to build our own textile industry. I really believe that if we're going to be home to mohair the world over, we have to start producing excellent end products locally, which celebrate some of these beautiful characteristics that I spoke of, but also this very unique African heritage. And it was ultimately with this in mind that I started my textile brand, focusing on a circular supply chain and creating very unique mohair textile pieces in South Africa. I think it's very important for all of us working in textiles and fashion to spend time talking about the producers and how valuable and impactful it is, not only to be connected to where your fabrics come from, but it's time that we go one step further and really start understanding the subtle nuances, the challenges, and really the beauty involved in farming our threads. In South Africa, it has been really great to see that as a mohair industry, we have reached an understanding that we are living in this constantly changing, rapid world, and there is a broad commitment to keep up with this continuous change. And this can specifically be seen in the impact that farming has on the environment. Mohair farmers in South Africa have been practicing regenerative land practices long before it's this current catchphrase, not because it's fashionable, but because it's the only way to sustain yourself in these semi-arid conditions. So when you're farming in the Karoo, you have to make sure that when it does rain, that raindrop falls on a healthy plant. And you want your plants to be healthy so that your animals are healthy and happy, because only with healthy animals can you produce quality mohair. So like I mentioned, it's this really uniquely sustainable natural fiber in that the longevity and the health of your land, your plant life, your animals ultimately informs the success of your farming business operation. And it's really one of the only practices where environmental sustainability informs your financial sustainability. What is really interesting is that we're this small, unique industry of under 1,000 farmers in South Africa, which offers this valuable opportunity for people to communicate very quickly and to impart necessary change quite quickly. And a fabulous example would be that almost all South African mohair farmers are now RMS certified. And RMS stands for the Responsible Mohair Standard, which is a global certification ensuring the ethical and sustainable production of mohair. And being a country that is very much focused on raw materials, this has been a fantastic tool for us to engage with the wider supply chain and be part of very progressive and forward-thinking collaborations. I really think the last thing I want to say about this, that now is the time for this conversation of farm, fabric, fashion more than ever. Brands are facing so much pressure to be traceable, to certify that their products are ethically and sustainably produced. And I think we can all agree that this is long overdue and so needed. I think it is really important too that we educate everyone involved and explain that this is not a quick fix. And if we are going to do this properly, it's going to take time, because this kind of certification or standards requires so much input from everyone along the supply chain. It needs constant bettering, constant adapting. And I think the biggest danger that we face is that end consumers determine what these standards look like without the input of actors and agents at the source and at every step of the supply chain. To give you a brief overview of the South African textile landscape, Unfortunately, we are a country with high poverty and unemployment rate, and this, coupled with a crippled formal textile industry, has left many of our artisans frustrated and unable to use their skills to earn an income. When we set out to build my brand, we deliberately decided not to focus on what we don't have and to look at what are the strengths and the skills that are unique to the socioeconomic and environmental makeup of the South African textile industry. So what do we have? We've got the best mohair in the world, produced under some of the most sustainable practices. We have some of the only processing houses. And even though we don't have a formal textile industry, we've got thousands of highly skilled traditional craftsmanship. And when you combine this with excellent design and quality, we can produce pieces that can hold their own on any world platform. And in a time, I think, when we can all agree, where we asked to be incredibly transparent and open about every step of our process, we find ourselves in a very unique and privileged position in that we don't have to worry about this, because what we do is so specific to the environment and the skill set that we have here that it becomes almost impossible to authentically replicate it anywhere else. And I think for me, this is probably the most important lesson that I would like to share today. I used to work in the fashion industry in Hong Kong and had these wonderful residencies in Japan and Italy. And I was so frustrated about what I thought I wanted to make with mohair, or what the world needed to see. And because we didn't have the technical know-how in South Africa. And really, it was only when I stopped fighting what we don't have that everything became small, simple, manageable, doable, and actually exciting. And I think that working around what you don't have is so much more interesting than what already exists. And if there's one thing that I leave you with today, is really understanding the impact and the power that you can have when you work within your unique ecological and social footprint. And it results in even the tiniest output being outstanding and capturing the attention and the imagination of those out there looking for moments of truth, of authenticity, of beauty, and of storytelling. So this concept of farm to fabric is very much woven into my being. I had the huge privilege of growing up on a mohair farm in the Karoo, and being a little girl enchanted by fashion and textiles, but living in this dusty, tiny little town, I always wanted to escape into all things city to experience this. And my dad used to chuckle and take me into the veld, which is just a local word for the natural environment. And he would explain to me that if I wanted to understand where fashion and fabrics came from, I needed to spend some more time in nature, the starting point from which the rest follows. And at the time, I thought, you poor delusional man, you really have no idea. But this has become the most valuable and primary principle from which we create, in that we feel strongly that circular, sustainable textile economies in no way start in factories, or in our case, the studio. The process starts with rain, with the delicate ecosystem of a desert plant life, quality of ground, the role of herdsmen, the importance of having happy, healthy animals in order to produce quality mohair. And only then, when you have the raw fiber, do you move into the process of washing, cleaning, opening, dyeing, spinning, until finally that yarn ends up on the loom. So in many ways, weaving and finishing are the last few steps of a very intricate and codependent supply chain. And once we see this connection between us and nature, you think differently, you make differently, you consume differently, and you certainly don't need more and more. And you become very selectful and respectful as to the timelessness of that piece. And for me, it turns a simple textile into an invaluable homemaker, passed down from one generation to the next, who build their own homes and they weave their own memories into these threads. I really believe that it's time for us as consumers to start recognizing our role in this ecosystem and to understand that our buying power has a ripple down impact on a long line of people, on the welfare of animals, and ultimately the preservation of land. For me, knowing where the roots of our fabrics come from, I feel a strong responsibility to finish the end product in a similar way. So for us, the end piece is as important as the origin, the makeup, and the process. Taking our design inspiration from the Karoo, where nature is the defining element, it informs every aspect of what we try to create. So nature's effortless composition, tactility, and coloring remains our greatest and the most humbling teacher, with the most valuable lesson and the one most challenging to achieve being that of simplicity. For me, the Karoo strips us back to what I call the mesmerizingly simple, with nothing to distract you from noticing the light, the scorch of a midday sun, the slow relief of an evening breeze, and the impossible quest of a dung beetle, rolling life's shit into this treasured ball of soul-defining importance. The Karoo humbles, making you feel tiny in its antiquity, and yet it generously offers up this canvas in which you can translate what you feel into shapes and forms that only you can imagine. And this feeling of being this tiny speck in space is then matched with a sense of enormous bigness and privilege, in that you know that you're the only person in the world who has noticed a tiny pop of purple in a passing desert plant. And then you look again and the light has changed and the plant is closed and things have kind of returned to a nothing to see here dull. A moment so small, simple, and yet what I call this mesmerizing humility. In our studio, we really prioritize time to play with shapes and forms and stitch lines. And through our fabric, we try to capture a little bit of this place, its people, the history, and our own personal relationships with tortoises and mountain folds. What I find very interesting is that the Karoo is home to mohair the world over, and that the fiber actually reflects the landscape from which it originates. It's soft, it's subtle, it has these unexpected twists and turns, and this phenomenal ability to absorb and showcase light and color. So in our work to celebrate the fiber, the land, and the hands that piece our work together, celebrating texture is fundamental to achieving this. So the irregularity of the weaves, the knitwear, and the yarns, for us try and capture these subtle shifts that happen across the Karoo's vast horizon. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about raw materials and hand spinning. We get our mohair directly from the farm. It's hand washed, sun dried, hand open, and hand spun. and working with raw natural materials that have never once left its place of origin, lost its natural character, been mixed with anything other, or touched by anything other than human hands and natural elements, gives our work this inexplicable feel of rawness, and it results in every section of yarn or weave being impossible to replicate, because it ultimately captures the heat, the curl, the hands, and the composition of that moment. And then because we hand spin, it combines this rawness with the personality of the spinner. So in our studio, we can see who has spun which yarn, because every time that a spinner is passing that mohair through their fingers and into the spinning wheel, it captures the thoughts and the mood of that maker. If they are angry, if they're daydreaming, if they're in love, if they're tired, if they're excited, all of those thoughts and feelings are captured in the rhythm of which they pass that mohair into the spinning machine. So tactility, mixing raw materials in old familiar ways with new design, is very much a characteristic of our work. In this time of heightened technology and doing so much of our life on screens, we have seen a reverse interest and pullback towards artisanal, handmade pieces and natural fibers, because there's this inexplicable comfort and soul that the user can feel in these handmade objects, which is one of the only things that is impossible for any mechanized, mass-made object to replicate. We really hope that our principles and philosophies form part of a ripple effect of change, a movement back to nature, agriculture, and ancient knowledge banks, making without wasting, foraging your threads, and creating pieces that encapsule this desperate and much needed feeling of home. Pieces that are soft, safe, familiar, and simple. To finish off, I want to talk about these desert mindscape tapestries to show this concept of farm to fabric. Unfortunately, you can't see or touch these, but each panel is made from mohair from a specific region or specific aged animal. And we've kept the mohair completely raw to show how natural elements inform the final feel, fabric, fall of these pieces. So for example, if a panel is made from mohair, from kid mohair, it's like humans. The first time a child has a haircut, that mohair is super delicate. It's soft. It feels like a combination of silk and cashmere. And then every time a goat has a haircut, the quality of its mohair changes. So if you have adult mohair in a panel, that mohair is much coarser and stronger. Depending on where a goat lives, the humidity of the area, the plant life of that area, it's the same as humans. Our diet, or if we go to a humid climate, our skin and our hair changes. So in these panels, you can really see how the natural environment informs the finished piece. So once we have hand spun and hand woven these panels, I will then sketch out a design based on my personal experience of the Karoo, whether it is desert architecture or the pathways of animals or humans around a homestead, the fall of seedlings and grass. I then sketch this out and then I give it to the artisans to stitch into these panels. So in many ways, it is women using a needle and thread to navigate their way through their minds meandering. It's a reflection of the feeling of women stitching their way through their days and escaping into making as a way of seeing their inner thoughts appear on the canvas of fabric. And for me, these pieces are the true value chain of why and how we create in the way that we do, in that I feel often only the designer or a house is recognized for the piece. But in this work, rainfall, plant life, the animal, the herdsman, the spinner, the designer, and the maker, everyone carries an equal amount of weight, and these pieces really would hold no soul without one of or the other. So in conclusion, the poetry, or really the beauty in these pieces for me, is that these panels capture the homes of souls, the fiber of animals, droplets of rain, and the crunch of a desert plant for breakfast. It's the openness to imagine the vastness of the unknown and the simple joy that we get in the in and out motion of darning our realities into these nonsensical, raw, textile roadmaps of where we have come from and how we wish to tread into tomorrow. In closing, I'm going to share a video that we did with my friend and wonderful South African designer, Leandi Mulder. This collection is a celebration of mohair yarns to show that how you put your fibers together can create something completely different. And yarns ultimately are the paint of a textile maker. So if you think of paint on a canvas, we're dealing with watercolor, acrylic, oils. So how you put the yarn together, mohair can present like cashmere and silk. It can look like raw silk. It can appear like wool or fluffy mohair. It's how you work with the fiber. And the more that you understand your fiber, the more you will be a master of what you want to try and create. And it doesn't come from creating an end product and moving back to the source. The more you understand the source, and your fiber will inform your end products. So this is a celebration of mohair yarns and a celebration of this color. And it's a story of homecoming and the place that our animals live in, the place where we live, the people, the mountains, the light. So it's really a story of origin, and we hope that you enjoy it. So from my side, I just want to thank you all for your time and for listening to our story. if you're interested in coming to visit us in the Karoo, to learn or to teach us something, we would love to hear from you. And we're always open to new ways of thinking or teachings as a way to escape the echo chambers of our everyday know-how. So please be in touch, and thank you again for this opportunity.